Though it's not yet officially a national holiday, Juneteenth was the first national commemoration of the freeing of African American slaves. It memorializes the date June 19, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger and a few thousand of his troops landed in Galveston, here in Texas, then part of a vanquished Confederacy, to begin enforcing freedom for the formerly enslaved black people. It was only that month that the Union had secured its victory over the Confederacy, when all Confederate combatants had surrendered. Well, of course, those slaves, many of them were shocked to find out that they had actually waited nearly 2.5 years for potential freedom, because President Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect in January of 1863. What these jubilant, celebrating former slaves also didn't know is that they and their descendants would have to wait another 100 years to even have legally recognized equality in the United States, never mind begin to achieve actual equality. If we as white people had endured the same horrific racial history as African Americans, if we were still encountering the attitudes and still forced to navigate the racist structures that remain in place, that are vestiges of what the racist white power structure put in place over 2 centuries, we would be in as bad or worse shape as a group as our African Americans today. Look at the metrics. African Americans have 5 times the incarceration rate of white people. They have 3 times the poverty rate of white people. They have less than 1/10 the wealth of white people. African Americans are only 3% of the corporate executives in this country. They are less than 1% of the Fortune 500 CEOs, 4 out of 500. But interestingly, we have the world's most powerful military. Nobody questions that. 9% of officers are African American. Now, that's still just over half of the percentage they represent in the armed forces as a whole, but it's a hell of a lot closer than the ratios in the corporate boardrooms and corporate executive suites. Most African Americans are not waiting for white people to say that they feel guilty for how African Americans have been treated throughout our history. Most African Americans are not waiting for white people to admit that they're privileged in our society. What most African Americans are waiting for is for white people, especially white leaders, to wake up and acknowledge that there are significant structures and barriers remaining in place to African American advancement in our country, in the criminal justice system, in the economy, in terms of housing patterns, which then has a huge impact on K through 12 education. And white people are not doing nearly enough to make the changes necessary to ameliorate those terrible problems. So as we celebrate Juneteenth, I hope that we as white people will resolve to stop asking African Americans to wait, to stop asking them to wait to reach their full potential within our country. I hope that we as white people will be the ones to start pointing out injustice, unfairness, insults, whether it's across our country or in our own offices. You know, most black people don't want to be that guy or that woman that has to point out problems that involve race. It would sure be nice if white people at least took some of that burden. White people do still dominate every realm of our society. So it's incumbent upon us to be the prime movers in the actions and the initiatives that will turn things around and enable even more African Americans to do great things in this country.